50 years ago, the head of the audiovisual department at USF came into a budget windfall of $6,000. He knew exactly what he wanted to do with those funds, and it was to start an FM radio station for the university. In 1963, FM was considered experimental, so it was pretty simple for universities to get those FCC licenses for stations, mostly because FM was one of those things that would really never catch on. After all, we had AM. Who needed more? Originally, the 89.7 signal reached the four corners of the Tampa campus from Fowler to Fletcher and 30th Street to about 52nd Street. Similar story for WUSF-TV, which came along just 3 years later. That black and white signal reached just into Temple's Terrace, which is just south of the university. You couldn't wake up to morning news on either radio or television because neither station was on the air till at least 10 a.m. And if students weren't around, well, you wouldn't hear or see anything. So fortunately, through the years, the stations had smart and innovative leaders who worked to get power increases for both stations. The university invested in the stations by supporting their expansion. And if we fast forward to today, WUSF Public Media has evolved to embrace 4 TV channels, 2 radio stations, a vibrant online platform, and a thriving video production department. Today, we're the only comprehensive media service in the Tampa Bay region. Nobody else has the assets that we have here at USF. During the past 5 decades, we've seen tremendous technological change as well. Things like cable television, high-definition digital broadcasting, web content, smart media devices. We've not only kept up with those changes, but we've even pioneered them. WUSF was the first public radio station and the first radio station in the state of Florida to broadcast an HD radio signal. And for a lot of people, that's the only way they can hear our great classical station WSMR. WUSF now works with NPR on a test project that utilizes our radio signal to reach deaf or hard of hearing people with emergency alert information. This is something that's text-based, very cutting edge, very important to people who need to receive emergency messages, and our stations have long provided emergency services for the community. We bring you a comprehensive variety of programs, and this year alone, we're most proud of our Florida Wildlife Corridor Expedition TV and radio reports, Florida Matters, our public affairs program, the University Beat, and our reporting on the vital issues of health, education, veteran and military families, and the environment. Our staff works with young students in Title I public schools and community centers using PBS Kids programs, reading and literacy and self-confidence. And of course, we work with USF students teaching broadcasting, video production, and recording skills. You hear those students on the radio and you see those students work on our TV station as well. Jazz and classical music come your way every single day on radio and TV. And on TV, we bring you a wide variety of cultural programs and great performance. Those live performances come to you pretty routinely thanks to Russell Gant from our studios on the USF Sarasota Manatee campus and right here on the Tampa campus as well. So much comes to you from a talented and dedicated staff, and I'd like to introduce a few of them to you. First, a man whose name I knew long before I came to WUSF. He was well known as a jazz announcer in jazz announcer circles 25 years ago, and he's our own legend, Bob Seymour.
Well, thank you, Joanne. A legend. It's a lot to live up to. It's a real pleasure to be part of this celebration here this morning and to say welcome and to say thanks to you for being a part of the family and part of what we do every day. It's great to be a part of a place where everybody who comes to work every day is a supporter of our efforts themselves, a member of the station, and where everybody is invested in the mission of serving the public that we do with your help today. And we're all fans of what public broadcasting does. Like you, I remember first being hooked on public radio and television myself. I remember hearing All Things Considered in its earliest days. I was always enamored of the radio, but it was the first time, I heard Susan Stamberg and Noah Adams, I suppose, in the early 70s, and it was a radio program that treated me like an intelligent, grown-up person with a sense of humor, and they would take several minutes to do an interesting piece or talk about a cranberry recipe, and wow, this was something new and different, and I was hooked. To find myself taking part in broadcasting like that for 32 years and counting is, I can't say it's a dream come true because I would have never even remotely dreamt it, but I feel very fortunate to work with the people who make this kind of radio and television, with the artists and promoters we deal with on a daily basis in the jazz world, and with most of all the listeners and viewers who complete the circle and make everything here possible. On the half-century mark to the day, isn't that something, on Friday the 13th, I feel a real sense of the lineage of WUSF in at least a couple of ways. I moved to town in the mid-'70s, and I was actually living in a rooming house in Pinellas Park in the Bohart's Coffee House for a while, trying to find some culture in this new home, and I found Vic Hall doing a Charlie Parker special on my little radio, and I thought, yeah, and little knowing that we would work together we would actually live directly across the street from one another for 20 years, and Vic was on the air here for 38 years as a volunteer of the 50. I started hearing about the recent demise of the Underground Railroad at that time everywhere I went, and for years, and still, I've talked sitting with Peggy at our table, and a few minutes ago she mentions her son has the Underground Railroad poster, and that was on the air here for a brief time starting in 1971 and made a huge impact. I started working in Sarasota and was working with the people who had done the Underground Railroad a few years later at WQSR in Sarasota. And some of you remember Sheila Stewart, and I treasure the fact that we worked together. Sheila started classical music on WUSF the same day that the railroad started. Classical music started, oddly enough, Valentine's Day of '71. The station then signed on the air at 2 in the afternoon. It had never been on a Saturday until that time in 1971. But Sheila brought classical music and also brought the concept of listener support with her. She had done Classical Music Association at a couple of other radio stations where in the commercial world it didn't take off. Excuse me. But Sheila was a focal point big in the way that WUSF makes an impact in the community. Sheila was a focal point of the music and theater, poetry, the arts community in Tampa Bay and Sarasota for many years, and was on the air till her death in 1987. Just a few weeks ago, 6 weeks or so ago, the BBC got in touch with us at WUSF wanting to follow up on Sheila Stewart. They realized that it was 80 years to the day since they had first put a woman newscaster on in 1933, a young woman named Sheila Stewart, and they were a little hazy about where she had gone. They didn't know the impact she had had here, but Sheila was a huge part of our community, and she'd be very proud of WUSF and WSMR and the legacy of listener support that she began at this radio station and television station. And finally, I'm proud of our jazz programming and what you've helped bring to the community in that way. It used to be midnight to 2 in addition to Vic Hall's weekly program, and I was a devoted listener in those days before being a part of it. It's now 58 hours a week, known nationally for the commitment we've made and the impact we've had in the jazz community, and like everything we do, that is all thanks to you. It's great to welcome you this morning, and again, thanks. We have a marvelous history, and we have a great future to look forward to. Speaking of working with wonderful people, I'd like to introduce you to the woman that you know as a delightful companion with classical music every afternoon, and she is delightful. Please welcome Bethany Cagle.
Thank you, Bob, Thanks for that. Thanks for the nice words. Can I get a microphone about this big? I'm used to the studio microphones, and you get to hide behind them. I grew up in Lakeland in a family that absolutely valued the community and what the community had to offer. Church, the parks, the library, the antique shows at the Civic Center, also, of course, public radio and public television. My Sunday mornings for many, many years, the soundtrack was something my mother picked, and that was the radio program that I know Lorraine remembers. At my table, we were talking about it earlier. Pipe Dreams. It was a pipe organ program that we would get ready for church to that program. My mom wanted us to hear some, what was, in her words, high church music, because we went, ours was gospel. So she wanted us to kind of get that feel of that kind of sound, that reverential sounding music. My father loved Adventures in Good Music with Carl Haas. So if we happened to be home from school and he was there working on the house, he had us stop whatever we were doing, Gunsmoke, whatever we were watching, and sit and have lunch with him and listen to Carl Haas, Adventures in Good Music. Saturday afternoons, we could be traveling to friends and family, and it's always Garrison Keillor in the car. You're all shaking your heads, right? You had the same experience. Each holiday, we turned to WUSF for the most sublime music, really, still today, the beautiful classical music. I'll never forget when my brother and I, about junior high age, found out that the station that offered my mother Pipe Dreams, my father's Carl Haas Adventures in Good Music, the stories of Lake Wobegon, also gave us a really, what we thought was a super cool show, pretty trippy, sounded kind of like the Twilight Zone, Hearts of Space on weekend nights, late at night, which would lead right into jazz. So we would still feel like that was the wildest music we'd ever heard with Bob Seymour. Names that were all a part of my life growing up in Lakeland. Then there's WUSF TV, the classic movies, Big Bird, which was great when you're babysitting. Also the opera, and finally at college, Robot Wars. Does anyone remember that late weekend program? It's a BBC, I believe, production, and you get together, it's different people who put together different machines and robots fight in the middle of the night. Okay, so you remember that. That was college age. I was here for college, USF, and I took a radio drama course. And this kind of thing I'm not comfortable with. I'm not comfortable standing in front of people and talking. Theater was a very uncomfortable study for me when we had to do these kinds of productions. But I found with radio, it could be intimate, and it could also be theater of the mind. So I just turned to radio. And of course, WUSF was the radio station I turned to. And I came here as a USF grad, or student at the time, and started reading for radio reading service. I got to read to the blind. And from there, got my foot in the door. I started as a board operator, running actually Bob Seymour's classical evening programs. He did classical and jazz. Learned quite a bit from Bob Seymour. And my family was so proud that I was here at WUSF. They were telling everyone. So my brother, his wife, and kids invited me to a family party that was a friend of theirs. And the word got around, I worked at WUSF. And before I left, a woman said, "Oh, you work at WUSF?" Yes. Say the names. Shostakovich, Russell Gant, Carl Haas, Tchaikovsky. Say the names. Trenum, Kemker, Sharp, Barkenfei, and Wallace. It was like a secret handshake. So I really look forward to another USF grad or student coming in to work with us and hearing them say, like I did to Russell Gant, Bob Seymour, your names, your music, your work has been a part of my life for so long. Oh yeah? Oh, fantastic. Say the names. Let me hear it. Trenum, Kemker, Sharp, Barkenfei. Thank you for your support so many years, and thanks to the support of everyone. And I want to introduce you now, so you already know him. Another voice I listened to a long time before I met him, at The Point.
Yes.
Yeah, doing the Colbert thing, the parody news before Colbert even did it. Carson Cooper.
Yeah, I did do that, didn't I? Well, I used to think 50 years was such a long time. Man! Of course, now I'm in my 50s, and I'm thinking, no, really blink of an eye, right? Well, Bob, Bethany, it's an honor working with you and the great staff here. I have been in radio in this area for a long time. In fact, when I started in this area, Bethany hadn't been born yet. Bob actually had brown hair, I think mostly, and it was just Trenum back then. back in the early '80s, when I was on the air here playing Cyndi Lauper and Boy George records, I was a big fan of WUSF back then. I remember Sheila Stewart Mondays, Wednesdays, and Friday afternoons. I remember listening to Vic Hall and Bob Seymour. I love that jazz. Now in the '90s, the Hootie era, Hootie and the Blowfish. I was still in commercial radio. I was doing that Colbert Report sort of news. I remember driving home from work though one day, and I was listening to WUSF, of course. I called Russell Gant. I heard this song, and I called Russell on the air and said, Russell, what was that song you just played? It was beautiful. And he kindly responded, it's not a song, it's a piece. Actually, he was very kind. It was a piece by Ravel. And who calls a radio station? Really, who calls a radio station? But I called. I love this station so much. And so, with all due respect to Boy George and Hootie and the Blowfish, it is really an honor to be here. I mean, I'm back to news. Actually, when I grew up in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, I grew up next to a radio station. And before I'd go to high school, I got a job there. I'd read newscasts before I went to school. And I came home, so I've always been a news junkie. I love bringing it to you. And today, with shows like Florida Matters, Joanne mentioned, it's really a great community involvement right now. We're kind of focusing on the upcoming governor's race. We had Nan Rich on the show last week. And that show elicited a lot of positive response from listeners on both sides of the aisle. The Times often cites our work, which really feels good. And we were even blurbed in a campaign flyer that went out a week or so ago. So I guess we'll take it wherever we can get it. Anyway, for 13 years here, I feel like a newcomer. I'm privileged to be here working with this great staff, and especially at a station that has such great support from folks like you here today. So thank you so much. Thank you for supporting this radio station. Joanne?